this video, we're going to be talking about how to choose a poem to enter into the Stephen Spender Prize and how to first read it in order to be able to start to translate it. So finding a poem is very easy actually. The best resource is on the Stephen Spender website. So you can go there and look at our poem bank where you'll find many different languages with several poems for each language in order for you to be able to start looking, use your dictionary, or perhaps you're fluent in your language, perhaps it's a language you speak at home, but if you're not fluent but it's the language that you want to work with, use a dictionary, start looking at key themes. If there's a word in there or a line that you think sounds beautiful, then give it a go. It could be the poem for you. If there are no poems that you like, or if your language does not feature in the poem bank, you can still use Google. So it's very easy to just put into the search engine the language that you want and that you're looking for poetry, and you will find online magazines, journals, resources, websites for you to be able to find a poem. Once you have found your poem that you think that you want to work with, it's quite important now to think about as well the context in which it's written. The poem that I've chosen today was written by César Vallejo, who was a Peruvian poet, and he is considered one of the great innovators of the 20th century in any language at all. And that is why I chose him, because I'm really interested today in talking about innovation as a translator of poetry. I think that this is going to be one of my top tips for translating poetry and entering the prize. If you are not innovative when you translate, then sometimes what you can produce is a stale copy of the original, where you keep very, very close semantically, so to the meaning of the original words, but the poem itself doesn't have a life. It doesn't have it's not the twin text of the original. It's lost something in translation, and that something can often be the poetry. So today we want to think about innovation. You need to be bold and you need to find the poet within in order to be able to be a translator of poetry. So a little context on Vallejo that before we look at the poem. Vallejo fought against Franco and the Allied fascist forces in the Spanish Civil War. Now he was Peruvian, but he joined what was called the International Brigades and moved himself to Spain in order to fight with the Republicans against the forces that he considered to be malign and doing wrong against the Republicans. So there was a kind of movement of solidarity from Vallejo, and this poem, very importantly, was written in 1937 in the middle of the Spanish Civil War. So first impressions of our poem. I'm going to read it first of all. So here's my top translator tip. You must read your poem aloud, even if it's a bit embarrassing. Hide yourself in your room. Read it even if you don't think you're pronouncing everything well. And that's because sometimes some of the things that the poet is doing in order to create mood and feeling are to do with sound, not just to do with the literal meaning of the word. So here I'm going to read just the first stanza of our poem. Al fin de la batalla, y muerto el combatiente, vino hacia él un hombre y le dijo, no mueras, te amo tanto. Pero el cadáver, ay, siguió muriendo. So, you might not speak Spanish as you're watching this video, you might not know what it's about, but maybe you even were able to grasp something from some of the exclamations that I made. So this poem is quite impassioned, and here you can see, even if you don't speak Spanish, that there's some speech going on. We've got some speech marks. So someone is speaking, and the exclamation mark usually means that someone is crying out, or weeping, or shouting, and so hopefully you could hear in my voice that there's some sort of passion and perhaps pain and imploring and longing in this poem. There's no rhyme scheme, and you can see this when you look at any language that you're working from. You're able to look at the end of the line of each line with each stanza, and you can find to see whether or not there's any rhyme going on. Now, rhyme is incredibly difficult to translate, so one of our top recommendations as translators working with the Stephen Spender Prize is that if you don't feel absolutely confident in it being able to translate both the meaning, the sense, and getting across all of that in with a rhyme as well, then it's absolutely fine. There's no problem with leaving rhyme out. You will not be disqualified. Your poetry translation is still as valid, and in fact you may produce a poem that is more alive, which is what we really are looking for. So the next thing to look at is structure. Here we've got quite a simple structure. There's a sort of mirror image. You've got a 4-line stanza, then a 3-line stanza, then a 3-line stanza, then a 3-line stanza, and then another 4-line stanza. We want to maintain that. It doesn't look very difficult to maintain. If we can, we're going to try and maintain that. Tones, as we said, impassioned, desperate, imploring. But then there's also that quite calm and measured tone at the beginning. Al fin de la batalla, y muerto el combatiente, vino hacia él un hombre. So maybe something's being told just more regularly. Here, what I like about this poem is that there's a story being told. Key themes, you can find that out. Batalla is in the first line. Combatiente is in the second. Batalla, as you can hear, is battle, batalla. And combatiente, combat, the word is in there. So there's something about war, battle. And then there are other themes that come out. Solidarity, brotherhood, they start to come out later. And sounds and exclamation mark. So those are the first impressions of the poem. Next, what we want to do is ask ourselves why we translate this poem. And why do we have to ask ourselves why we chose this poem? Of all the thousands of poems that there are in the world, what made you choose this one? Well, this is the key to how you're going to translate the poem, because those things that you love about the poem are those things that you're going to try to preserve in your translation. So for example, for me, I find it very moving, this story of solidarity between all mankind. I can also hear the passion. I love the passionate speech in the speech marks, so the calling out, the shift in tone between this storytelling and then this very impassioned, you can almost hear the cries of the men. I also really like that this poem depicts not the glory of war, but the painful personal side. So there may be something in that I have to try to preserve as well. So next we're going to be looking at how to start your first draft of your translation.